Nolan didn't expect to be guiding a woman in designer heels through a pitch-black alley at midnight. But then again, his life hadn't followed a single expectation since his daughter was born 6 years ago. "Are you sure this leads back to the main street?" the woman asked, her voice tight but calm, even as her heels clicked nervously against the cracked pavement. Brandon glanced over his shoulder at her. "Yeah, it's just a shortcut, not the prettiest detour, but it's safe. I walk this way every night." The woman looked out of place, her silk blouse catching the dim glow of the street lamp behind them, her dark hair pulled into a sleek twist. She clutched a small clutch bag like it was a life preserver. "I shouldn't have taken that wrong turn," she muttered. "My driver's probably circling the block." "You'll be all right," Brandon said. "I won't let anything happen to you." She blinked, surprised at how steady and certain his voice was. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, then shrugged, adjusting the strap of his beat-up backpack. "Because I'd want someone to help my daughter if she were lost in the dark." That made her stop. She stared at him for a second. "You have a daughter?" "Yeah, Danielle. She's 6, smart as hell, loves pancakes and thinks glitter is a food group." A small laugh escaped her lips. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't," he nodded toward the end of the alley. "We're almost there." When they stepped onto the main street, the warm hum of traffic and neon signs replaced the eerie silence of the alley. She exhaled, visibly relaxing. "You know, you didn't have to walk me the whole way." "I know," he said, "but I figured you'd sleep better knowing you weren't alone." She turned to face him fully now, and for the first time he saw her clearly under the streetlight. She was stunning, sophisticated, and probably way out of his world. "I'm Zariah Daniels," she said, extending her hand. He hesitated, then took it. "Brandon Nolan." Her grip was firm. "Well, Brandon Nolan, thank you for being the one decent man in the city tonight." He gave a small smile, glad it could help. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb behind her. The driver jumped out, flustered. "There you are, Ms. Daniels." "I'm fine, James," she said, without breaking eye contact with Brandon. "Completely fine." Brandon nodded and started to turn away. "Wait," Zariah said quickly. "Do you live nearby?" "Just a few blocks," he replied. She dug into her clutch and pulled out a business card. "This is my office. I know it's random, but I'd like to thank you properly. Come by sometime, okay?" Brandon glanced at the glossy white card. "Daniels Holdings." Zariah gave a slow smile. "Yeah, that Daniels." He blinked. "You're that Daniels." She laughed again, softer this time. "Millionaire, businesswoman, all that. But tonight I was just a woman who was scared, and you didn't treat me any differently." Brandon felt a strange tug in his chest. "Well, I don't really care who you are. You looked like you needed help." Her smile widened. "All the more reason I want to see you again." He tucked the card into his pocket. "I'll think about it." "Do," she said, stepping into the car. As it pulled away, Brandon stood there under the neon lights, still a little stunned. He walked home to his tiny 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where Danielle was asleep under a blanket of unicorns, a babysitter dozing on the couch. But he couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the alley. And Zariah Daniels couldn't stop thinking about the way he never flinched, never asked for anything. Just a man doing the right thing. The next morning, Brandon found the card on his nightstand. He picked it up, stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into his wallet. He didn't think he'd ever use it. After all, she was a millionaire, and he was just a poor dad trying to make rent. But life had other plans. 3 days later, he was wiping tables at the diner, where he worked the early shift when she walked in dressed down in jeans and a cream sweater. But he still recognized her instantly. "Hey," she said, sliding into a booth. Figured if you weren't going to come to me, I'd come to you. Brandon blinked, gripping the edge of the table. You really don't give up easy, do you? Zariah leaned forward, her eyes bright. Nope, and I still owe you a proper thank you. You already said thank you. I mean more than words. How about dinner? He raised a brow. You want to take me to dinner? I do. I've got a kid. I don't really do fancy. Great, she said. Then let's not do fancy. Let's do something real. He stared at her for a long beat. All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. My life's messy. Zariah grinned. I like messy, it's real. He turned back toward the kitchen, heart racing. Somehow, guiding a woman through a dark alley had just changed his entire life. And it was only beginning. Brandon adjusted the sleeves of his one decent button-down shirt as he walked up the wooden steps to the modest brownstone where Zariah had told him to meet her. He'd left Danielle with his neighbor, Mrs. Elkins, a retired kindergarten teacher who adored the little girl and insisted on watching her anytime Brandon had something important to do. Zariah had given him an address, not a restaurant, not an office, a home. That had surprised him. Even more surprising was that he'd actually shown up. He pressed the buzzer, and after a few seconds, the front door opened. Zariah stood there barefoot, holding an open wine bottle in one hand and a corkscrew in the other. Hope you're okay with pasta, she said, stepping aside to let him in. He hesitated briefly. You said dinner. I thought you meant somewhere, public. I figured this would be better. Less noise, no cameras, and I actually like cooking when I'm not working a 12-hour day. Brandon looked around as he stepped into the townhouse. It wasn't what he expected. The furniture was modern but lived in, the bookshelves crammed with novels and travel guides. A large canvas leaned against one wall, half covered in streaks of deep blue and copper paint. You paint? He asked, nodding toward it. When I can't sleep, she replied, setting the bottle on the kitchen counter, which is often. He watched her move through the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair loosely pinned now. She looked different like this, more relaxed, but still in control. So what's the occasion? He asked, leaning against the counter. You've got 100 people who probably owe you favors. Why me? Zariah pulled 2 wine glasses from the cabinet. Because you didn't ask for anything. You didn't try to impress me or pretend to be someone else. That's rare. I didn't know who you were. Exactly. She handed him a glass and raised hers. To detours. He clinked his against hers, then took a sip. Pretty nice place for someone who doesn't like cameras. She smiled slightly. I bought it before Daniels Holdings took off. It's the only thing in my life that still feels like mine. Brandon nodded slowly. So you cook for strangers often? Just the ones who save my life in alleyways. He chuckled, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, even here in her world. You didn't seem like the type who'd make pasta from scratch. Don't judge until you've tasted it. As she turned to drain the noodles, Brandon let his eyes wander again. On the side table was a framed photo of Zariah with a woman who looked older but shared the same sharp cheekbones and posture. They were standing outside a vineyard, arms around each other. Your mom, he asked. Zariah's hands stilled above the colander. She passed last year, stroke. I'm sorry. She raised me alone, taught me that nobody's coming to save you, so you better learn how to save yourself. She set the pot down carefully. Everything I've built is because of her. Brandon nodded once. Sounds like she was the kind of woman who didn't take crap from anyone. Zariah gave a soft laugh. She would have liked you. They sat down at the small dining table near the kitchen window, and Brandon tried not to feel out of place as she served him a steaming plate of pasta and poured more wine. You're not what I expected, he said finally. She tilted her head. What did you expect? Someone colder, maybe polished to the point of being untouchable. He twirled a fork through the noodles. You're still intimidating, don't get me wrong, but you're human. Zariah leaned back, her eyes narrowing slightly. You think I'm intimidating? Absolutely, in the same way hurricanes are intimidating. I'll take that as a compliment. They ate in silence for a few moments, the clink of silverware filling the space between them. I looked you up, she said suddenly. He froze mid-bite. Not in a creepy way, just curiosity. She set her fork down. You work 2 jobs, you've never missed a child support payment even though you're the only parent, and you volunteer at the community center on weekends. Brandon wiped his mouth with his napkin. Didn't realize I was being vetted. I'm not vetting you, I'm trying to understand you. He leaned forward. What is it you're trying to understand? Zariah's eyes met his across the table. Why someone with every reason to be bitter is still kind. Brandon didn't answer right away. He reached for his glass again, thoughtful. Because my daughter watches everything I do, and I want her to believe that good men exist. That quieted her. For a long time, they just looked at each other, the air charged with something neither could name. Eventually, she stood and began clearing the table. I'm hosting a fundraiser next week. It's business, mostly. Stiff, overpriced wine and fake smiles, but there's one empty chair at my table. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Come with me, she said. I don't own a suit. I'll take care of that. I don't know which fork goes where. Then we'll fake it together. He watched her, unsure whether this was a dare or a test or something else entirely. You really don't let people say no to you, do you? I let them, I just don't make it easy. He stood, ran a hand over his jaw. All right, but I'm warning you if anyone asks what I do for a living, I'm not lying. Please don't, they could use the shock. As he stepped out into the night, the city lights stretching ahead of him, Brandon realized something unsettling. He wasn't just intrigued by Zariah Daniels. He was starting to like her. And that was going to complicate everything. Brandon adjusted the cuff of his borrowed tuxedo for the 3rd time, standing in front of the gilded mirror just off the mezzanine of the Langford Hotel's rooftop ballroom. He didn't normally wear cufflinks, let alone ones that shimmered under chandelier light. The suit had arrived earlier that afternoon, delivered by a courier with a handwritten note in clean, looping script. No excuses. See you at 7. No signature. No need for one. He stepped onto the marble-floored terrace, the city stretching out below like a living painting. Every surface gleamed, from the crystal glasses on silver trays to the polished shoes of the guests weaving through conversations about stock movement and property acquisitions. The kind of crowd that didn't notice the servers unless their wineglass was empty. And then he saw her. Zariah stood near the grand piano where a jazz trio played something sultry and slow. Her gown was a deep sapphire, cut close to her figure with a long, sweeping back. She wore no necklace, but her earrings caught the candlelight and tossed it back like stars. When she turned and saw him, her expression shifted something quiet and certain in her eyes. You clean up well, she said, stepping toward him. I'm still waiting for someone to tell me I've wandered into the wrong party. She studied him. You belong here more than half the people with trust funds in this room. He gestured toward a passing waiter. They look like they were born with wine lists in their cribs. Zariah took 2 glasses from a tray and handed him one. That doesn't mean they know what to do with it. He took a sip, letting the bubbles settle on his tongue. So what exactly are we fundraising for? Urban Redevelopment Project. I'm backing a housing initiative near Clinton Avenue, trying to push back against a corporation buying up the whole block and hiking rents. He blinked. That's where I live. I know, that's why I picked it. Brandon lowered his glass. You're serious. I'm not in the habit of inviting men to black tie events just to impress them. If I care about something, I act. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, letting the truth of it settle between them. Come on, she said. I want to introduce you to someone. Before he could object, she was already moving through the crowd. He followed, conscious of every glance they drew. She stopped beside a man in a sharp charcoal suit, hair slicked back with precision, holding court among a group of investors. Brandon, this is Ezra Glenn. Ezra, this is Brandon Nolan. Ezra extended a hand, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. You're the mystery guest. Brandon shook his hand, firm and even. I hear you're a single father, Ezra said, sipping his scotch. That's no easy feat. Brandon gave him a measured look. It's not a feat, it's my life. Ezra's smile tightened. Well, Zariah rarely brings anyone into her circle. You must be something exceptional. Zariah cut in smoothly. He is. Brandon didn't look at her, but he felt it how deliberately she'd said it. Not for show, not for appearances, but because she meant it. As the evening wore on, Brandon met more of Zariah's world. Board members, nonprofit directors, a woman who designed half the skyline. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He spoke plainly when asked questions and listened more than he talked. Later, on the balcony that wrapped around the ballroom, Zariah leaned against the railing with a glass of water in hand. The city lights reflected in her eyes. You handled yourself better than most CEOs I've met. Guess I've had practice staying quiet while people talk over me. She glanced sideways. That wasn't what I meant. Brandon looked out over the skyline. I didn't come here expecting to fit in. I didn't invite you to fit in. I invited you because I wanted you here. He turned to face her. Why, though? You could have anyone. She hesitated, then said, because when I'm with you, I don't have to be the version of myself people expect. I don't have to calculate my words. I don't have to perform. Brandon stayed quiet, heart pounding in his chest. And when you walked me out of that alley, she went on, you didn't treat me like a brand, you didn't ask for anything. You just made sure I was safe. I didn't know who you were. I know that's the point. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. You want to see where it come from, he said suddenly. Her brow lifted. You mean tonight? You've seen my borrowed tux and my borrowed manners. Maybe it's time you saw the real thing. She didn't hesitate. Let's go. They left without fanfare. No goodbyes, no announcement, just the city swallowing them as the elevator descended. Brandon's apartment wasn't glamorous. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old newspapers, but when he opened the door, Danielle was curled on the couch, head resting on Mrs. Elkin's lap, a picture book still clutched in her hand. She stayed awake waiting for you, Mrs. Elkin said softly. Said she wanted to meet the lady in the shiny dress. Zariah knelt beside the couch, her fingers brushing a curl from Danielle's forehead. She's beautiful. She's everything, Brandon said. Zariah looked up at him, eyes shining with something more than admiration. So are you. Mrs. Elkin stood. I'll give you two some space. I live just down the hall. After she left, Brandon carried Danielle to her room and tucked her in. When he came back out, Zariah was walking slowly through the apartment, taking it in. The chipped coffee table, the mismatched chairs, the framed crayon drawing on the fridge that read, Daddy is my hero. I like it here, she said, turning to face him. It's not much. It's honest. He stepped closer, his voice low. I've been trying to keep my distance, because didn't think your world and mine had anything in common. They don't, she said. They collide, and maybe that's what I need. He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him shifted. I want to see where this goes, he said. So do I. And when he kissed her, it wasn't polished or planned. It was real. Just like everything else between them. Zariah sat cross-legged on the edge of Brandon's worn couch, her heels kicked off, a bowl of popcorn between them, and Danielle nestled beside her with her favorite blanket. The movie on the screen had long since lost her attention, something animated and chaotic, but Zariah couldn't stop watching the way Danielle leaned into her dad with absolute trust. Brandon glanced over and caught her watching. "You're not into talking penguins." "They're charming," she said, "but not as charming as watching you two." Danielle yawned dramatically, then looked up at Zariah. "Do you have to leave?" Zariah ran her fingers gently through the girl's curls. "Not yet." Danielle nodded, content, and returned to the screen. Brandon kept his eyes on the movie but said quietly, "She doesn't get attached easily." "I'm not trying to be a substitute," Zariah replied just as quietly, "but if she ever wants me around, I'd stay." The weight of that settled between them, not heavy but undeniable. Later, after Danielle had fallen asleep and was carried back to bed, Brandon stood by the window, watching the street below. Zariah joined him, her arms folded, the city lights flickering behind her in the glass. "She asked if I was your wife," Zariah said. Brandon turned his head slowly. "What did you say?" "I told her I wasn't, yet." He froze. That's a dangerous word to throw around. Zariah's voice softened. "Not if it's honest." Brandon turned fully toward her. "I've never had someone like you in my life. I don't even know what this is supposed to look like." "Maybe it's not supposed to look like anything," she said. "Maybe it just is." He looked at her for a long time. "You really think someone like you could make a life with someone like me?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." There was no hesitation in her voice, no careful wording, just certainty. Brandon stepped closer. "I've never had room to dream bigger than keeping the lights on and getting Danielle to school on time." "Then let me help you dream," Zariah whispered. He shook his head once. "I don't want to be your charity case." She reached for his hand. "Then don't be my partner." He stared down at her, his thumb brushing against hers. "I've built my life on steady ground brick by brick. Can't promise I'll know how to do this perfectly." "I'm not asking for perfect," she said. "I'm asking for real." That night, she didn't leave. She stayed, curled up next to him on the couch, the soft sound of Danielle's breathing down the hall like a lullaby. By morning, the sun poured through the windows and lit up the room in gold. Zariah rose quietly and padded into the kitchen, finding flour and eggs and a container of blueberries in the fridge. Her omelets were mediocre, but her pancakes those she could do. Danielle padded out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "You're still here." Zariah smiled and gestured to the pan. "And I brought blueberries." Danielle climbed onto a stool and watched her work. "Daddy doesn't put fruit in pancakes." Zariah grinned. "Well, maybe he'll change his mind." Brandon emerged minutes later, shirt wrinkled, hair sticking up. "Is this my kitchen, or did I wander into a brunch commercial?" Danielle held up a forkful triumphantly. She made pancakes with blue stuff. Zariah turned to him. "She approves." He leaned on the counter, watching them. "I can see that." After breakfast, Zariah stood at the sink, rinsing plates. Brandon joined her, drying with a towel. "Do you ever slow down?" he asked. She handed him a plate. "I don't know how, but I want to learn." "That's a dangerous thing to say around me." "Why?" "Because I'll hold you to it." She faced him. "Then teach me." The following week, Zariah canceled 3 board meetings. She let her assistant handle the quarterly briefing. She rescheduled a trip to Milan, and instead, she learned how to pack a school lunch. She walked with Brandon and Danielle to the park. She sat on the bleachers at Danielle's after-school dance recital while Brandon cheered loudest from the back row. On a Saturday morning, they stood in front of a narrow, empty storefront on Clinton Avenue with peeling paint and a crooked awning. Brandon unlocked the door. The inside was dusty and bare, just exposed brick and old wood floors, but the possibilities were endless. "I saved up for 3 years," he said. "It's not much, but it could be something." Zariah walked slowly through the space. "What do you want it to be?" "A diner, real food, fair prices, a place where people feel like they matter." She turned to him. "Do you want help?" He hesitated. "What kind of help?" "The kind that doesn't come with strings, just belief." He studied her face. "You'd invest in this?" "I'd invest in you." He stepped closer. "This doesn't scare you?" She reached for his hand. "It does, but not as much as the thought of walking away." In the weeks that followed, the space transformed. Brandon worked late into the night sanding, painting, installing shelves. Zariah brought in an architect who owed her a favor. Danielle named the place the Alice Light. Opening day, the line wrapped around the block. Locals, community families, even Ezra Glenn showed up begrudgingly impressed. Inside, Brandon stood behind the counter in a crisp white apron, Danielle beside him in a matching one. Zariah wore a tailored dress and no heels for once. When the crowd quieted, Brandon cleared his throat. "We started this place with an idea, that people matter, that kindness matters, that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." He looked at Zariah. "I never thought I'd have a reason to believe in things bigger than myself. But then, I met someone who didn't just walk into my world, she changed it." Zariah stepped closer and took his hand. "And I met someone who reminded me that love isn't strategy or timing, it's trust," she said. "It's honesty, and it's showing up when it counts." Danielle tugged at Zariah's sleeve. "So, are you going to be my real mom now?" The room stilled. Brandon knelt beside his daughter. "Would you want that?" Danielle nodded, serious. "She makes good pancakes." Everyone laughed, and Zariah wiped at her eyes before crouching down too. "Then, I guess I'd better keep making them." Brandon stood, turned to her fully. "I meant to wait, for the right time, for the right moment, but I think this is it." He pulled a small box from his back pocket and opened it. A delicate ring, simple and bright. "Will you marry me?" Zariah didn't hesitate. "Yes." The room erupted. Danielle clapped wildly. Someone started crying in the back. Brandon kissed her gentle, sure, with a promise that needed no words. And in a diner built from dreams, on a street once forgotten, a poor dad and a millionaire stood together, equal, in love, and finally home. The scent of fresh baked cinnamon rolls filled the newly opened diner as sunlight poured through the large front windows. Brandon moved from table to table, greeting customers by name and checking on plates with the ease of someone who had finally found solid ground beneath his feet. His apron was dusted with flour, his sleeves rolled up, and for the first time in years, there was no weight dragging behind his smile. Zariah stood behind the counter, reviewing the day's receipts with a pencil tucked behind her ear. She wore a soft green blouse and flats instead of heels, her hair loose around her shoulders. She glanced up when Brandon leaned across the counter, planting a kiss on her temple. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "What thing?" "Working while pretending you're not working." She tapped her pencil against the margin. "Old habits die hard." He nodded toward the dining room. "You see how many people are sitting in here because your name gave this place a shot." She arched a brow. "Are you saying I'm finally useful?" "I'm saying you're mine," he murmured, and she flushed but didn't look away. Before she could answer, the door swung open and a familiar voice called out. Daddy. Danielle bolted inside, backpack bouncing, her hand wrapped in Mrs. Elkins's. Brandon bent and scooped her up in one fluid motion. Hey, superstar, good day. She nodded with oversized seriousness. I got a sticker for helping Ryan with his reading. Zariah reached over and high-fived her. That sticker worthy in my book. Mrs. Elkins smiled and gave Brandon a look. She talked about the wedding all the way home. Danielle wriggled in his arms. Can I wear purple? Can I, please? Zariah leaned in. You can wear anything you want, as long as you don't outshine me. I'll try, Danielle said solemnly. Mrs. Elkins chuckled. I'll leave you three to it. After she left, Brandon set Danielle down and turned to Zariah. We should talk about it. The wedding. We've been dodging the planning part like it's a root canal. Zariah rested her elbows on the counter. Have one condition. Just one. No guest list that looks like a boardroom. No press. No investors, just us and the people who matter. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Done. That night, they sat around their kitchen table, a stack of notepads between them, Danielle scribbling on her own sheet with a pink crayon. Zariah circled a date on the calendar. 3 months is enough time, not too long to wait, not too fast to panic. Brandon looked over her shoulder. You sure you don't want a castle or a rooftop with string quartets? I want vows under the sky. I want dancing on grass. I want Danielle throwing petals and cake that doesn't come from a showroom. He leaned back in his chair. You're starting to sound like you've always belonged here. She looked at him, quiet for a moment. Maybe I always have. I just didn't know it yet. The wedding was held on the edge of a quiet park just outside the city. Pale string lights were strung between trees, and folding chairs lined a narrow aisle scattered with flower petals. Danielle insisted on spreading herself. Guests were few. Mrs. Elkins, the staff from the diner, Zariah's assistant Harper, who cried before the ceremony even started, and a few old friends Brandon had made during his years working double shifts. Zariah wore a champagne-colored dress with delicate embroidery that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Her bouquet was simple, fresh lilacs and eucalyptus. Brandon wore a navy suit with no tie, his collar slightly open, his hands steady as he waited beneath the canopy. When Danielle took Zariah's hand halfway down the aisle and walked beside her, the hush that fell over the crowd was more reverent than any chapel silence. As she reached him, Brandon whispered, You take my breath away. Zariah's voice was barely audible. Then, I guess we're even. Their vows were handwritten, spoken without microphones. Brandon spoke of quiet mornings and second chances, of the way she'd walked into his life like a storm and left it calmer than it had ever been. Zariah spoke of finding truth in unexpected places, of choosing love without conditions, of building something new with hands that had once only constructed empires. When they kissed, the applause was thunderous, and Danielle let out a loud whoop that made everyone laugh. Later, under a canopy of starlight and laughter, with music playing from a single speaker and sparklers flickering in guests' hands, Zariah led Brandon to the center of the grass. You're not escaping the first dance, she said. I don't know if I can do this without stepping on your feet. Then I'll just have to hold you tighter. As they moved together, slow and unhurried, Brandon buried his face in her hair. I never thought this would be my life, he said quietly. Zariah pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. That's the best part. We didn't plan any of it, we just chose it. He kissed her again, a kiss that was neither rushed nor showy, a kiss that belonged to them, built on all the minutes no one else had seen. As the night wore on, they sat on a blanket in the grass, shoes kicked off, Danielle curled against them with frosting still on her cheeks, and the stars overhead bright and endlessly patient. Zariah rested her head on Brandon's shoulder. "So what now, Mr. Nolan?" He looked at the sky, then at her. "Now we live, we build, we grow old and raise a daughter who knows exactly what love looks like." "And what does it look like?" she asked. Brandon wrapped his arm around her, drawing her closer. "It looks like this." And in that moment, surrounded by everything they'd never expected but always needed, they knew. This was forever,